This is Dyer from jaysanalysis.com. Listen, I want you to check out my new book, Esoteric Hollywood, Sex, Cults, and Symbols in Film, which you can order from Trine Day Publishers at trineday.com or at amazon.com. And I think you'll enjoy it. If you like this analysis that I do of Twin Peaks, it's based on the essay that I wrote that is in the book. It's one of the chapters, and it's selling like a hot cake, like one single hot cake that has been broken into miraculous loaves to give everyone hotcakes, the miraculous hotcake loaves. And again, you're going to like this. I'm re-uploading this analysis because YouTube kept slapping it with copyright infringement, so I had to change some of the images and pictures. And enjoy the Twin Peaks analysis, and if you would, get my book, Esoteric Hollywood. I know you're going to like it if you like movies. It's not just film analysis, it's like Roger Ebert on acid.
You, my guardian angel, take my soul of fire. In this game, we're double agents.
You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer. Esoteric Hollywood is where I deconstruct the deeper messages, symbols, and predictive programming subtext that underlie modern film. In this show, we will be interviewing artists, experts, and numerous people in media fields. This will all be based on my years of research in comparative religion, propaganda, psychological warfare, secret societies, and espionage. Esoteric Hollywood decodes the biggest movies in an unparalleled way, from the classics of the silver screen to today's blockbusters. Learn to watch film with completely new eyes as we enter Esoteric Hollywood.
Welcome to Esoteric Hollywood. This is David Lynch. I want to recommend the analysis of Jay Dyer, the only Twin Peaks analysis that I can give the David Lynch seal of approval to. Way to go, Jay.
Welcome. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. Tonight, the owls are not what they seem, and as you heard in that introduction, David Lynch himself has given Jay's analysis the official seal of approval for correctly decoding the mysterious 1990-91 drama Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks, soon to be rebooted, and a perfect topic for Esoteric Hollywood. Serial drama, crime drama, mystery, psychological thriller, supernatural, horror, satire, soap opera, spoof. Nothing like it. If you don't know, Twin Peaks follows the investigation headed by FBI Special Agent Dale Cooper, played by Kyle MacLachlan, looking into the murder of homecoming queen Laura Palmer, played by Cheryl Lee. Pilot episode first broadcast April 8th, 1990 on ABC. Several more episodes were produced, and the series was renewed for a second season that aired until 1991. The show's title comes from a small fictional Washington town named Twin Peaks. TV Guide in 1997 ranked Twin Peaks number 25 on the 45 on the greatest shows of all time. So quite a bit of philosophical depth at work in Twin Peaks. So we are going to decode this hardcore. I don't know how else to say it. You're not going to get this kind of analysis anywhere else. I found one other guy who did a pretty decent work decoding a couple things that I missed when I went through the series for, I think, the third time recently. This time around, though, this a few months ago, I really think I got the big picture. I think I've pretty much nailed it. But I want you to give me some feedback if you think I'm wrong. If I missed something, if I got something wrong, please do correct me. This is not a cult yet. I will be opening my specialty cult in LA only for supermodels, a self-help massage spa parlor with me as the head hierarch of this cult. But it's females only, and preferences are given to supermodels. They're the only ones that are going to be saved. We're going to call it Dyernetics, and I'll be the head of the cult like L. Ron Hubbard. I learned just beneath the surface. Actually, I should do this in the David Lynch voice, so it would make a lot more sense. I learned that just beneath the surface, there's another world, and still different worlds as you dig deeper. That's a quote from an interview with David Lynch. Now, if you ever sense the flimsy, thin veneer of what parades itself as the good old US of A, and you felt a bit like you've been sold a fake, then David Lynch's Twin Peaks is a series that you would love. More like an initiatory experience than a mere television series. I would argue that Twin Peaks kind of functions as a hilariously terrifying vision of the real America, right? That lurks beneath the seedy underworld of the facade of white picket fences in a kind of surrealist nightmare fashion, if you've ever seen Lynch's Blue Velvet. Now, much like the picturesque severed ear on the beautiful lawn in the 1986 comedic horror Blue Velvet, Twin Peaks might even properly be titled an esoteric, dark, satirical soap opera, as I said. So perfect for Jay's analysis. Now, there are countless reviews, essays, and analyses of Lynch and Twin Peaks, but almost all of them, in my view, miss the complex system of symbology and hidden meanings that relate directly to what I would say is pretty high-level occultism, synchronicity, surrealist philosophy, and especially with Lynch, sort of Far Eastern Zen notions. Now, before we go there, I think we should discuss the setting. The set and setting. Twin Peaks is aptly described as quintessential Lynch. Fans will often speak of scenes, even in movies outside of the Lynch corpus, as being Lynchian. So David Lynch has actually been able to kind of create his own dreamscape atmosphere, right, that you just recognize if you've watched a lot of David Lynch and you see it elsewhere. I think of recent films that I saw, like Nicholas Refn's what was that, God, No Forgiveness, or whatever, the one with Ryan Gosling or something, or I didn't really enjoy that film that much, but it had quite a few David Lynchian scenes for sure. So, God, no, what is the name of that movie? Only God Forgives, something like that. Some bizarre, strange ideas, but and some good cinematography, but kind of lost in the meaning of all that. And I consider myself somewhat proficient at decoding films. Now, nothing stands out with that epithet of being Lynchian than this surrealist neo-noir melodrama that magically captures the spirit of America itself, as I argue. And this differs from later Lynch that's focused, I think, on Hollywood, or what I call the Hollywood trilogy, being Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, and Inland Empire. Twin Peaks is more akin to his 1990 film based on the novel Wild at Heart, starring Nicolas Cage, right? Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern. Laura was great to work with, right? Because I've worked with every actor in the world because I'm Nicolas Cage, and I've been in every film in the world. Now, I can't resist to do a Nicolas Cage impersonation. Sorry, but if you haven't seen Wild at Heart, it's probably Lynch's funniest movie, hands down. It gets funnier with more viewings. In fact, this is a snakeskin jacket. It's a representation of my freedom and individuality. where Nick Cage does his Elvis impersonation. Well, this is a snakeskin jacket. In its presentation of America in miniature, Wild at Heart is a satirical picture of, it's a satirical picture of America and the American dream. And you're going to see a similar idea here with Twin Peaks. Now, Twin Peaks does, like later Lynch films, share deeper occult symbology. As I mentioned, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, and Inland Empire. And we might touch on a little bit of those because they will relate depending on how time goes in this episode of Esoteric Hollywood. In this analysis, we will delve deeper into a unique place, though, which I think is the subconscious dreamscape of Lynch. And there we'll decode the scenes and images that may still mystify many 25 years later. Now, worth mentioning before delving into the narrative is also Lynch's preferred style. Part horror, part neo-noir, part comedy, part melodrama, part soap opera. The Lynch-Frost collaboration collates a vast array of Hollywood classics, from the Hitchcock method of doubling to Otto Preminger's 1944 noir classic Laura. The parallels between the Mynah Bird from Hitchcock's The Birds, the hard-hearted detective, grizzled loner who finds himself taken with an apparently murdered Laura. Right. This trope abounds in noir. Now, Lynch intentionally includes countless parallels to sprinkle his work deriving from the golden age of cinema. Think of Sunset Boulevard, which I think, pretty sure I've read that Lynch cites in interviews as being heavily influential on his style. Now, as we enter the world of Twin Peaks, its protagonist, Agent Dale Cooper, played by Kyle MacLachlan, who arrives to investigate the enigmatic murder, and later we find multiple murders, of popular high school blonde babe Laura Palmer. Now, Laura Palmer is intended to sort of be the high school perfect girl, and sort of the good girl that everyone thinks is a good girl. And this is in fact based on an unsolved murder from Mark Frost, one of the co-creators and co-directors with Lynch, Mark Frost's hometown. So Laura will function as the focal point of the show's entire arc. Now, however, it's Agent Dale Cooper who unravels the actual story of Laura's demise. The truth involves a much wider conspiracy than is originally conceived. With his unorthodox divination methods of solving crime, Cooper astounds local law enforcement with the concept of utilizing synchronicity to associate similar themes with inanimate objects in a game of rock toss. This odd practice will configure Cooper as both a classic pulp detective, I think we could say, kind of bogey, Casablanca Maltese Falcon. Then I think also we could look at other influence. Sam Spade, I guess we could say, right? Sam Spade. But also we could grant him a kind of mystical side from which he will draw from in order to peer into the psychosphere. Welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of Jay's Analysis. And you're listening on TalkNetwork.com, the best place for independent talk radio. I want to remind you to get your organic supplements as we get close to the holiday season, as well as all kinds of survival gear at j.talknetwork.com. That's the best place to go for preparing for anything that could come. All right, it's not just about collapses or government false flags or something like that. It's also about standing up to the elements. Most disasters that humans will encounter in their life are actually the natural phenomena of the changes of the seasons, weather patterns, right? That's the majority of what you're going to face. Power outages, ice storms. We have those quite frequently where I live, as well as tornadoes. So go to j.talknetwork.com and you'll see it's not just supplements, it's also survival gear. Now, we're talking about Twin Peaks, and as I commented before, we were looking at the shamanic journey. I quoted Mircea Eliade and Ioan Culianu. Now, in previous analyses at Jay's Analysis, I talked about Lynch through Cooper drawing on a highly complex and deeply rooted Eastern notion of formal and essentialist associations that extend beyond the immediate space and time of objects. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that the objects, as we tend to think of them in the world, we think of them as discrete, right? Independent objects that have no relation or connection to some other object. So if there's a chair in one room and then there's a chair in another room, we just think of them as separate chairs. We don't think of them as sharing any sort of essential chairness or quality or special quality that's metaphysically out there in the world that makes them chairs. But as we move Eastern and back into medieval and ancient thought, it's still and was the norm to think of these things as having an essentialist connection. This is what Plato would call the realm of the forms. And that essence that all of these objects might share, right? You and I would share these as humanity. We share human nature. This essence or special property that makes that thing, and no other thing is something that extends beyond the immediate phenomena of spatial and temporal relations. So chairness is shared, right? Even if we move those two chairs 1,000 miles apart, they're still sharing the property of chairness. And even if we say burn one of those chairs and destroy it, well, it's still the case that at one time they both shared the property of chairness, right? And now, this is important because this is kind of, I believe, the basis for how there could be something like synchronicity. And synchronicity is what's going to be the means by which Cooper will actually do a kind of divination throughout the series in order to try to solve these heinous, mysterious crimes that we will learn actually tend to line up with ritual murder. And in fact, that will be the case. So it's not just the murder of girls or human trafficking. Much more is going on here. And this sets the stage for Cooper to be much more than merely a clever detective, but rather we see the emergence of his role as another world traveling shaman. Right? He's able to go beyond. He goes into the ether, the astral realm, the realm of the spirits, the other side, the very thing that David Lynch talked about in the quote at the beginning. Later in the series, it's Cooper's spiritual gifts, right, that are noted by Native American Deputy Hawk, as well as by General Briggs, where Cooper is eventually revealed to be the one who can travel to and call between the worlds, right? This fulfills the role of the magician or the shaman from the series' famous tagline, which reads, "Fire, walk with me." Now, this is the role of the shaman I described in my thesis on Lost Highway. I have an extensive analysis of the out there bizarre psychical film that has mystified many out there, known as Lost Highway, the other David Lynch film that I believe kind of is kind of a part one in his loosely titled Hollywood trilogy. Citing author Peter Levenda, I noted, in Twin Peaks, it is the light of the morgue over the place where the body of Laura Palmer has been kept, and which is then visited by Mike, the one-armed man, who recites the famous poem, "Through the darkness of futures past, the magician longs to see. One chance out between two worlds, fire walk with me." There, in a little strange little verse, Lavender writes, "We have the key to unlocking the mystery not only of Twin Peaks, but virtually all of Lynch's films. The suspension of normal laws of time, futures past, and the idea that the magician lives between two worlds, the suspension of normal linear narrative event, in the favor of, in fact, a dreamlike hallucinatory set of images that are taking place all over the fourth dimension. This is part of Lynch's appeal as a director and part of what makes his film so frustrating to the average filmgoer. His realization is that there are two worlds and a place to stand between them. And this is what contributes to his aura as a modern 21st century initiate of the mysteries. That's what a mystery film is, right? It elucidates the core mystery behind reality itself. And this forms the solution to Lost Highway as well. The shamanic and magical elements are here in full force, as Fred is a character trapped in a different psychical world that seems to unfold and envelop other psyches as well. Now, when we interpret Twin Peaks, I think accuracy involves understanding the notion of Twilight language, or Sandabayasa, which I've mentioned many times in talks. And it's my contention that Twin Peaks should be read in this way if the series itself were perhaps a kind of yogic text. Sandabayasa is the notion of synchronicity or events being written like a text, like a story, but in a higher way. And this is natural, I think, given Lynch and Agent Cooper in the story's preference for Eastern meditation. I'll quote Indian scholar Vijay Mishra, who comments on the ambiguous semiotic discourse involved in Twilight as follows. Tantric texts are often composed of an intentional language, Sandabayasa, a dark, secret, ambiguous language in which a state of consciousness is expressed by an erotic term, and the vocabulary of mythology or cosmology is then charged with a hatha yogic or sexual meaning. According to Iliada, it is translated enigmatic language. Max Muller called it a hidden language. All the works of Sahayanya and Sandabayasa are written in light and darkness, partly light and partly dark. Some parts can be understood while other parts cannot. And this is from the book Devotional Poetics and the Indian Sublime. Now, Cooper's methodology is really about reading omens, dreams, visions, and divination. And this gives us an insight into the metaphysics of Twin Peaks, which are very much in line with the presentation here at Jay's Analysis. If you go read my site, you'll find many pieces there that line up with how that kind of a worldview is possible. Now, from the film Twin Peaks, the film version, Fire Walk With Me, which is the name of the movie that came out after season 1, we're given the impression here that Laura's spirit has actually summoned Cooper from the FBI to come and investigate from the spirit world. So it's actually Laura who's brought Cooper there, not Cooper who has chosen to come there. Consistently through the series, Cooper receives messages and clues from this spirit realm, or what might accurately be called, as I said, the aether or astral realm, the psychosphere. Now, as he sleeps, it's Cooper's higher self that enters into this realm and communicates with this assorted cast of motley characters and shades, ranging from Laura Palmer to a young version of what looks like David Lynch himself, to a midget known as the Man from Another Place, and played by Michael J. Anderson, and then a giant. So here we have the Anunnaki, the notion of the Nephilim even coming into the mythology of Lynch's Twin Peaks. Channeling these entities, then, Cooper gradually sort of unravels the Twilight language script, and he decodes it right behind this wooded Washington city. And we, the viewers, embark on the same initiatic journey of decoding the script with Cooper. So thus, from reading the simulacra within the simulacra, it's Cooper who begins to discover the secret of Twin Peaks involving the black market. Not just one black market, all of them. And this is where town tycoon Ben Horn organizes and controls local prostitution, local gambling, drug running, and much more through his private club, One-Eyed Jacks. We're talking One-Eyed Jacks in reference to Twin Peaks. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. And One-Eyed Jacks is the backdoor secret prostitution lodge that's across some sort of lake that you have to get to at night. It's kind of unclear. But it's a private club, and what's interesting is that when we see this one eye imagery, in this case it's relevant, it's useful to point out, because one eye will come up more than once. The town oddball character Nadine has only one functioning eye, and she later dissociates to a younger version of herself, curiously. So was she abused? Is she just insane? We don't really know. Was she part of this network at one point? And she possesses apparently excessive strength. Does she have some sort of demonic connection? Apparently, right? So, but it just in the narrative though, Nadine functions as the comic foil to the more dramatic situation with Laura. But her initial psychosis and dissociation to a different persona is the key to Laura Palmer, as well, as we will see. And One-Eyed Jacks is the locale of where Ben Horn controls Vice, because he has connections, as we see, to larger criminal networks and mafia organizations that are personified in the characters of the Renault brothers. Horn's network includes legitimate face and shell companies that are several businesses throughout the town, from the Great Northern Hotel to Horn's department store. And there's secretly a nearby casino, and then the Cat House. Now, while not directly involved in the occult, it's Ben Horn who is the sort of archetypal 80s yuppie businessman who has no direct involvement, we discover eventually, in the murder of Laura, though he's an initial suspect. While briefly accused, the reality surrounding Laura and Ben Horn is actually far deeper. Now, Cooper discovers through the eventual disclosure of Laura's secret diary that she had been raped since she was 12 by her father, Leland, played by Ray Wise, and a spirit who possesses Leland named Bob. Bob, we learn, is a former killer who has become a demon in the afterlife. And he possesses individuals such as Leland and then later Wyndham Earl to commit crimes such as pedophilia and sacrificial murder. Now, I've detailed the reality of this frightening process in a piece that I called The Fractured Psyche, right? And the Noose. And you can find that at Jay's Analysis as well. And there's a comprehensive treatment of understanding what has happened to Laura and Leland in that essay. But I think that essay is not just applicable to the fictional case of Laura and Leland, but applies to the real world. This is, I think, what we really see with people. Now, concerning alters in the split psyche, in that piece I wrote, when we consider specifically the fragmentation of the psyche, the extreme versions appear in the diagnoses of cases of MPD or DID, dissociative identity disorder, schizophrenia, and then the unifying factor between these being severe trauma, often in childhood, actually. Now, the trauma in later life appears in what's often called post-traumatic stress disorder, with the same patterns of dissociation, fragmentation, and psychosis appearing frequently. Now, what is most never discussed, though its evidence of this surfaces daily, in particular to former military or pop star circles, is the reality of ritual abuse. And having read several works on that topic, ritual abuse appears frequently in relationship to these kinds of circles, but it goes unmentioned often in the mainstream until we get to things like the Savile case, right, of Jimmy Savile in the UK. This tide appears to be turning with Savile, but even the mainstream media is still forced to report on this avalanche of officials involved in these kinds of occultic and ritual abuse scenarios. The subject of fragmentation of the psyche, right? It's a topic that I said it's very profuse in alternative media, and I don't think that a lot of people know exactly what they're talking about, but the general idea is kind of out there and somewhat, I think, accurate, and the cases and nature and extent of it are still somewhat shrouded in mystery, though modern medicine and psychology have quite a bit actually to say about the matter. And one of the reasons that this disorder is controversial is that it doesn't fit very well with the dominant materialist biological reductionism upon which most science and mass science is built. Mass science, modern science, scientism is more so a slave to the corporate state as an ideology and as a propaganda platform, with people like Bill Nye, Daniel Dennett, Hitchens, Dawkins, Neil deGrasse Tyson, right? And given the presupposition of modern science that the psyche is entirely equated with the brain matter itself, the assumptions are thus that any possible solution to a mental problem should and could only be remedied through the suppression of and rearrangement of various molecular compounds, aka drugs, Big Pharma. That's why Big Pharma is the solution to everything, at least ideologically, is because of the presupposition of Darwinism. And this is why pharmaceuticals are recommended for any kind of problem across the board. And it may provide some temporary relief or the subduing of certain manic tendencies or something like this, but it fails to address the spiritual dimension of man. And this excludes from the outset that the psyche might be more than just a series of firing neurons. But the monetary and propagandist power of these corporations, combined with the power to dictate results through funding of so-called objective studies that vindicate the latest happy pill, it disavows from the outset any other approach, and any other models, any other therapeutic applications are just dismissed out of hand. Now, despite the deep interconnectedness of the pharmaceutical industry with the intelligence agencies and the psychological and biological warfare industries, few and far between are those who are, really willing to question this approach as a whole. And I think this is due, again, to the almost universal indoctrination of this reductionistic, neo-Darwinian, materialistic perspective. And this preconditions then all approaches to therapeutic psychology, biology, medicine, etc., etc. Now, one example of the dilemma of a proponent of the modern approach that has to be grappled with is what I've highlighted before, that even the DSM-V, Diagnostics and Statistics Manual version 5, that the psych industry utilizes for its so-called diagnoses, it still references articles about mind-controlled altars. So, if mind-controlled altars don't exist, if it's the raving fiction of conspiracy lunatics, I apologize if my allergies are going crazy. I can't help it for all the sniffing and so forth tonight. But then it needs to be revised, right? I mean, all this needs to be thrown out. Now, if you even give this book that much credence anyway, most of these disorders, so-called, are just made up. They're just titled these disorders. And it's subject to change quite frequently. Transgenderism was a mental disorder back in the 70s and 80s, and now it's not. So, it's just make it up as you go, I guess. The circular nature, right, of this existing psychological establishment vindicates, ultimately, the pharmaceutical establishment. That's why it works the way it does. That's why it continues to operate unchallenged and just pumping out pills to put us in this Brave New World situation. And this in turn provides funding to vindicate the psychological establishment. So the circular establishment then becomes the de facto final court of appeal. So even as its theories and revisions are constantly overturning with each decade, the cycle itself continues. Now this is important because this relates to everything that we're looking at in terms of Twin Peaks, because the central characters in Twin Peaks have this problem of dissociating spiritual possession and so forth, and they don't know what to do. And they've been traumatized, right? Their psyche is split, and it's not just a split psyche, but also an invading spirit is involved in the case of both Laura and Leland. In Laura's case, there's good Laura and bad Laura. there's Laura who's sort of gives into her dark side and becomes this evil Laura, which is in a way kind of making fun of soap operas in the 80s and 90s. And then there's good Laura, who's the front face, right, of this persona of the good girl homecoming queen. Now, it's important too that it's not just the black market of prostitution and drugs. It's actually the luring of young girls into porn. And there's a cult that exists amongst the Twin Peaks elite that formerly met in secret, we discover, for ritual magic ceremonies. As the thread unravels, it's the spirit of Bob that serves as the foot soldier for this mysterious midget character called the Man from Another Place. The Man from Another Place organizes the occult marriage ceremony for the girls who are offered to Leland and other cult participants. So it starts with drugs and porn, and then the girls are lured into prostitution, and then we even get hints of snuff films that involve this ritual magic cult. And it's not always explicit, but this is my interpretation of what's going on with those involving the wearing the ring, that they're part of this cult. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood, and we're breaking down Twin Peaks. And when we come back, we're going to talk more about this cult network that appears to be in the background behind the front of Ben Horn. Ben Horn's not actually in the cult. He's just a self-involved, hedonistic, pragmatic businessman. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood on TalkNetwork.com. Welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. We're talking about Twin Peaks, and we've gotten to the point where there's a lot more going on under the surface of this idyllic yet bizarre small town of Twin Peaks, population 55,000 and something or other. Not only is there a black market, not just prostitution and drugs, gambling, it's actually the luring of young girls into porn and prostitution, high school girls. And then beyond that, there's a layer of darkness. And that is a cult that seems to be centered around a group of strange spirits headed up by the Man from Another Place, some sort of interdimensional, alienish midget demon. And I want my Garmonbosia. Now, what's the Garmonbosia? Well, you're going to find out if you remember that bizarre scene. Now, as the thread unravels, right, it's the spirit of Bob that serves as the foot soldier for the Man from Another Place, who organizes the occult marriages, as we said. And so it starts with drugs and porn, leads into prostitution and human sacrifice. So behind the real dark power in Twin Peaks is this Black Lodge, and it's curious that it's called the Black Lodge. In Between Worlds, the Black Lodge bears a striking resemblance to what some call irregular forms of masonry, secret societies and cults, satanic cults, right? Known as Black Lodges, where dark arts are performed. The Black Lodge is also mentioned in Crowley's novel Moonchild. And the reports of Lynch, actually, there are reports of Lynch, rumored, I don't know if this is true, but rumors at least of Lynch asking his actors and crew to speak and walk in reverse for the filming of the astral scenes in the lodge. And this may have a Crowleyan sort of undertone. I don't know if that's true, but that's at least what some have said. Now, all of this is told in striking detail in Twin Peaks as Cooper's visions demonstrate this human sacrifice component. In other words, Bob is a demonic force that's subservient to the man from another place, whose lust for fun seems to involve rape, pedophilia, and murder. And it's a consistent narrative where these old men have their way with young girls, and then that's what kind of harkens to this pedophilic. And then we think of the one-armed man, Gerard/Mike, who displays the magical ring that sort of identifies him as a part of this cult. Now, in possessing individuals for the purpose of carrying out these acts, it's Bob that captures the pain and misery stored in the blood of his victims, and he pours them out as a sacrificial offering to this man from another place. That's the Garmonbozia. If you think of the, as I said, that bizarre scene in the Meals for Wheels old woman's house, right, where Bob says, I want my Garmonbozia. Or excuse me, the man from another place says, I want my Garmonbozia, his cream corn. And what he means is his food, and his food is signified as the pain and misery of the energy, the blood of the sacrificial victim. It's contained there. Now, in almost perennial demonology, this concept has many precedents that maleficent spirits actually feed on the pain and misery of victims in this parasitic fashion. Now, I did come across a good analysis at Sound and Sight magazine that it's now become Pop Optic, and I contributed a piece or two for them some months ago. And there was another girl who wrote for them. Her name's Justine Smith, and she wrote, quote, then, of course, we have Bob. For those unaware, the town of Twin Peaks is similarly populated by a spiritual lodge that travels or is somehow engaged by electricity. And this is important when you watch the movie. One of its members, perhaps its leader, is Bob, who menaces Laura throughout her life. She claims to have been raped since she was 12 and is similarly violent. In this scene, he is not only in stark contrast to the pink childlike bedroom, that is when Bob shows up raping Laura, he is in search for her hidden diary. The fact that he mirrors her reactions is another mode of doubling, commonly found in surrealist work, as well as Hitchcock, as I mentioned. And it suggests a deep connection between them, however unwilling. Finally, we have the end of the scene where Laura's father exits the house, and having already entered the space, we are fairly certain that he wasn't there before. So Laura and Bob are one and the same. Excuse me, Laura's father, Leland, and Bob. This girl asked this question, and it's obvious. Yes, they're the same. They're the same because Bob's possessing Leland. Now, the Garmonbozia, cream corn, all right. And if you go to Jay's analysis, you'll see my more in-depth analysis of Twin Peaks, and you'll see the imagery that I included in my article where I show you the scene where he's talking about this. And the man from another place, the little midget demon, identifies the Garmonbozia there as the pain and the sorrow. The pain and misery of the ritual sacrifice becomes the food of the demon. So the answer to Justine Smith's question is yes. Specifically in the case of Laura, we find her youthful trauma from Bob Leland to have caused her psyche to split into alters. This is revealed in the show explicitly and more clearly in the film, where Laura demonstrates a duplicity of good girl, bad girl, detailing in her diary the trauma she was unable to cope with from her father's own personality split. So Leland himself, right, had these same issues. Leland, just like Laura, was subject to a dual personality, and eventually Leland giving in to his dark side led to this possession by Bob. Now, this is also strikingly revealed in the driving scene in the feature film Twin Peaks Fire Walk With Me, where Leland encounters Gerard / Mike, because Gerard has a spirit that possesses him as well, where he wears the cult ring, and the ring functions as a trigger for Laura and Leland to dissociate. So not only was Laura lured into the exploitative field of prostitution, she had been subject to ritual abuse. And in this regard, the symbology of the ring suggests both the goat and the demonic if you look at the shape of the ring. And it's not just that, it's also two mountains and a portal between two mountains, as we'll see here in a bit. Now, the ring suggests the goat and the demonic inverted horns. In another sense, it's a group or a cabal, a ring, right? A ring of people. It also displays different planes of existence, as I said, and the portal between the two worlds, the two peaks. The Twin Peaks signify the two worlds. And in a three-tiered sense, the White Lodge, Earth, and the Black Lodge. Now, you have to see my analysis at Jay's analysis because it's difficult to give an imagery of this over audio. But if you look, you'll see I point out in the scenes there's actually included in the background real ritual magic sigils. So if you note the sigil next to Cooper hanging on the chalkboard in my analysis, you'll see what I'm talking about. And what almost all researchers have missed who try to deal with Lynch and this film is the crucial imagery that we see at the police station, where in the background Cooper and Sheriff Harry Truman have pieced together these ritual magic sigils. But they're not explicitly referred to in the screenplay. It's only in the background that we see this. Now, presumably connected to the crime scenes in the former FBI agent turned psychopath Wyndham Earle, it's the ritual magic sigils that are explained in a video of Earle, right? Where Wyndham Earle, who's a former FBI guy turned evil, turned psychopath, he describes tapping into the left-hand power of the dark side through the Black Lodge. And so the sigils in Twin Peaks are in fact sigils from the Goetia, or the Lesser Key of Solomon, which specifically relate to the invocation of demons. Another weird feature that comes up in Twin Peaks that's worth mentioning is the scorched engine oil throughout the series. And now this is a reference to the oil sludge that is found in the woods at what they call Glastonbury Grove, the site of the forest portal, which includes a reference to Arthurian mythology. So out in the woods is where the entranceway, the portal to the Black Lodge is, that Cooper eventually discovers. And it's the area, it's the circle of trees that they call Glastonbury Grove. Now this makes one immediately think of ancient British occultism, again Savile, the elites in the UK, perhaps Bohemian Grove, and the idea of the Grove goes back far beyond the history of England. We read the Old Testament, you can read in books like Kings, Chronicles, and there'll be mentions of the high places in the groves, and the monotheistic cults of the surrounding area of Israel would worship their deities on top of these mountains, right? So when God appears at Mount Sinai in Exodus, conversely, the other gods of the nations would demand that their followers meet them on the high places, the groves at the top of the mountain. And so that's why Glastonbury Grove is significant here in Twin Peaks. Now, Earle arrives on the scene in season 2 to capitalize on the dark forces in Twin Peaks, and he's seeking this portal to the lodge in the woods. Now, hovering over this black viscous oil is the portal to the portal site. In other words, is actually the site of ancient ritual practice, we learn. And this is where gods and demigods are invoked. And Lynch seems to be saying here that actually America itself is perhaps a land of primeval fallen forces that rule our present reality from behind the veil. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood, and we're breaking down Twin Peaks with Jay Dyer, your host, and you're listening on TalkNetwork.com, the best place for non-corporate free talk radio. Welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. We're breaking down Twin Peaks, and we're talking about Wyndham Earle, the FBI agent turned dark side, turned psychopath. And we talked about how Earle arrives in season 2 to capitalize on the dark forces in Twin Peaks, seeking the portal to the lodge in the woods. And as we said, hovering over this pool of black viscous scorched oil is this portal to a site of ancient ritual practice where gods and demigods are actually invoked. And Lynch seems to be saying, as I said, that America is this location. Right? Twin Peaks is kind of America in miniature. Now, this is significant in terms of the consistent red veil imagery that we see throughout the series. And this accompanies any entrance into the Black Lodge. You see the big red veil and then the zigzag pattern floor. And the planetary and astrological conjunctions are mentioned, right, that determine the opening of the portal to the next world. Fear, Cooper says, opens the door to the Black Lodge. And love opens the doorway to the white. Now, also revealed in this association of dubious characters is the somewhat goofy figure of Major Briggs, the military mystic who believes in the supernatural. And this leads to classified connections to Project Blue Book, he mentions, the military's UFO research. Now, in reality, Project Blue Book was a cover story for advanced technology of testing aircraft, in my view. And but yet even here, it's a curious association, right? As Major Briggs's classified work in the series, it actually involves occult research. And so what Briggs seems to be is maybe an approximation of the kind of real programs that John Ronson writes about in his Men Who Stare at Ghosts, or if you've seen the George Clooney film, I think Jeff Bridges in that too. Men Who Stare at Goats, you'll know what I'm talking about. Now, this is based on reality where there was a high-level military special forces soldier, brigade, battalion, that participated in these kinds of remote viewing, occult activities, extrasensory perception, Stanford Research Institute type stuff, and they were called the First Earth Battalion. That's actually a real thing. And you can look this up. I'm not making it up. Again, there's a movie and a book on it. Yeah, just looking at the Wikipedia here, it even says, according to the book Men Who Stare at Ghosts by journalist John Ronson, Mr. Shannon spent time in the 70s with many of the people in California, credited with starting the Human Potential movement. And subsequently, he wrote an operations manual for the First Earth Battalion. It's a 125-page mix of drawings, graphs, maps, polemical essays, point-by-point redesigns. And he imagined a new battlefield uniform that would include pouches for ginseng, divination tools. Right, so it's like these magic warriors that they're going to turn the special ops guys into. And the movie came out in 2009, right? And in the movie, they're called the New Earth Army. Oh, it's all kind of a ridiculous thing, but modeled after this notion of the warrior monk, I guess, with special powers or something. But a real thing, regardless. And this is kind of who this character of Major Briggs, this is what he seems to embody, is this kind of a character. Now, also relevant are recent stories about high-level ritual occultism and Satanism involving the Presidio and U.S. military elite, and with the associations of high-level military ceremonial magic ceremonies being conducted on the West Coast and wooded groves. Bohemian Grove comes to mind. As the owls are not what they appear. And Lynch seems to be saying that the real power structure in the soap opera charade that is America is actually subservient to dark forces beyond our plane of existence. Subservient to the demonic, right, is the hypocritical face that the establishment puts forward to cover up the nefarious mirrors that the dual level of reality in the world of Twin Peaks show, right? The spirit world of the Black Lodge and what undergirds it. Now, Wyndham Earle attempts to concoct his own ritual by sacrificing Cooper's later love interest, Annie, played by Heather Graham. Earle specifies that it must be done in the grove, in the magic circle, and entering the circle leads to the ether, where events can transpire through magical intentions in this life, right? This is the whole point of it. Now, so symbolically, the death of the queen, we're told, will fulfill Earle's simulacrum pre-planning that he's used through playing cards. Earle is a serial killer who's been putting like a deck of playing cards, Joker, Ace, Queen, right, King, at the site of different murder scenes. Now, the playing cards also harken back, though, to One-Eye Jacks, where the logo of One-Eye Jacks is the playing card, the Jack. And fortune and fate are then thus personified in the series as elemental spiritual forces of nature. And I think this focus on the elemental spirits is the reason for Log Lady. Now, Log Lady is the sort of fool character, if we were to think of like a tarot deck or the Fool. And the Log Lady plays this sort of Sphinx-like sage character who, if you watch the intros that are on the DVD series to the show, the Log Lady intros provide consistent clues to the actual overall narrative of the story, which I think is pretty fascinating. A lot of people just skip over the Log Lady, but if you actually watch the Log Lady, she tells you pretty much what's going on in the series as a whole. Now, the Log Lady plays this minor role, but her comments are actually about synchronicity. They're about symbolism, and they're about clues that point to the forces of nature, right? Logs are wood, and this is why we have the association with the wood that makes up the hotel and the forest, right? The wooded area where the portal and Glastonbury Grove are. Now, in the background to Twin Peaks, we have a mix then of these elements of the ancient world: air, earth, fire, water, and ether. Yes, you will see me talk about these things quite a bit at Jay's Analysis. The classical 5 modes of matter or elements in the ancient world. And this elemental focus, I think, explains why Josie, in that strange scene, is trapped inside the wood of the hotel when she dies. A lot of people were sort of mystified at this bizarre scene, but that's why. Now, others meet their demise in direct association, for example, with fire or burning exhaust or oil, Laura's death, etc. And in the ancient world, and equally true of the ancient Far East, I think is the point that nature was not a collection of just random chaotic atoms bouncing around that we think in terms of modern reductionism and scientism, but it was a vivid landscape, right, populated by countless spirits, angels, demons, and thus all of the folklore that we have passed down. And I think it's that kind of world that Lynch wants to be the real backdrop for Twin Peaks. And if you go to Jay's Analysis, you'll see also in my piece on Twin Peaks, you'll see the image of the White Lodge, the Black Lodge, and the two peaks, and then the portal between them. And it's somebody made this graphic, I don't know who, but it's laid out perfectly. And I think you could call this mystical toponomy. If you've read Michael Hoffman's classic book, Secret Societies and Psychological Warfare, he'll talk about this notion of mystical toponomy, that the geographic locales of Earth have specific places that will have a deeper significance, right? So this might tie into synchronicity with the location of bomb testing sites, a Trinity site in New Mexico, or something like this, or Devil's Tower in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind. You're right. So Route 66, Devil's Highway, or something like that, and then it might have there might be a significance in some case to a day, a calendar day, the Dia de los Muertos in Spectre recently. Right, these could be instances of mystical toponomy, to use Hoffman's term, and I believe this comes ultimately from the books of James Shelby Downard, King Kill 33, or Carnivals of Life and Death. We'll find references there to mystical toponomy. Now, I think this is real. I do think there's something to, as I said before, synchronicity, Sandabhyasa, Twilight language, mystical toponomy. I think these are all real things. And the mystical toponomy of Twin Peaks is a great insight, a great example of this, because we have all of that laid out in this 2-series fictional presentation with one movie. Now, the ultimate climax of the show was going to feature a Cooper who has lost his way through fear. Right, it's what Cooper said a minute ago. That fear leads to the Black Lodge, right? And then with the real Cooper trapped in the Black Lodge, it's Bob, we figure out, who's going to possess Cooper's body. Now, Cooper's curiosity and desire for the knowledge of the beyond, and in particular, he develops a fascination for the dark side. This is what's going to lead to his demise in a way much similar to other Lynch works, as we'll see here in a moment. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. Remember to get your supplements and survival gear at j.talknetwork.com. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. We're talking about Twin Peaks. I've been breaking it down. And we got to the point where the climax, of course, features Cooper bashing his head against the mirror as he's possessed by the spirit Bob. Now, Bob then is directed by the man from another place, it seems, to go after Cooper, because Cooper's gone down this path of looking too deep into the dark side. And this provides the opening, the doorway for Bob to possess Coop. And this desire for knowledge of the beyond and the dark side, I think, is a welcomed warning, because we see this pattern in other Lynch films like Lost Highway. And in Lost Highway, I described that there's the series began, right, with the possession of an initially good man, and the series ends with Cooper as a vessel of evil. And then what I describe of Fred Madison, played by Bill Pullman in Lost Highway, is then relevant to Agent Cooper as well, right? So in Lost Highway, there's this non-linear neo-noir occult psychodrama that looks at the dark side of Hollywood and the underworld, where the mafia, porn, crime, and the occult coalesce into an interwoven web, a story about one man's psychic journey down a lost highway of his own stream of subconscious, conscious unconsciousness and thought, as the viewer travails the fields of madness with Fred Madison, right? The name itself tells you what's going on down his road. We are brought back to the very point where the film Lost Highway began, right, where the movie scene opens and ends in the same scene. And this is the cycle that Fred has imprisoned himself in, right? Now, packed with dualism, illusion, and mystery, Lost Highway is about life and the dark side of our own inner underworld, the subconscious, which Lynch mystically will link to other people's subconscious. Now I find this fascinating. It's almost like the dream world, the dream state, the subconscious, collective unconscious is kind of connected between everybody. And perhaps that's some insight into what happens in possession, right? If there's a spirit that possesses someone, this is a spirit in that realm, stepping into the doorway of another person's consciousness, to use the Dark Tower analogy of Stephen King. Now, if we fail to realize the reality of these evils, such as possession and the mysteries of the subconscious, are we liable to be trapped like Fred or Agent Cooper in our own imprisoned mental madness? As I said, his name, Madison, is a clue symbolizing his descent into madness. And Alice, who is Renee's alter in Lost Highway, will bring to mind Alice in Wonderland. And we think of alternate worlds, fictional worlds, mental worlds, and alternate personalities. Now, was Alice a victim of mind control like Fred in Lost Highway, or are they both willing accomplices in evil? Perhaps both of those things are true. Now, will the obsession with Hollywood and the celluloid Videodrome and its cousin, the now omnipresent surveillance society, will it bring us truth, or more likely a descent into madness, depersonalization, and dissociation like Fred, given the fact that Lost Highway is about surveillance and the surveillance video society? That's partly what that film is about, and Hollywood's role in that. Now, either way, I think Lynch is forcing us to examine that at base, reality and the psyches are still mysteries to be decoded. They're not easily solved. And in the series, the finale, strange ending sequence with Cooper being possessed, Cooper discovers, in fact, that Bob has possessed Earl and Laura's dad, Leland, and that's who's organized their last round of murders. It's not really Leland, it's not really Wyndham Earl, it's Bob possessing these people, and that's why the pattern emerges. The synchronicities emerge because it's a spiritual force behind these people who are possessed. And we think here of books like Maury Terry's book, Ultimate Evil, where we see these kinds of patterns possibly popping up in murder crimes that could be coincidences, but they also might go beyond just coincidence and suggest spiritual forces. And there's actually quite a few X-Files episodes that hint at this as well. And I think it's worth pointing out too that there seems, I'm not positive this is just a thesis I kind of toyed with, and I saw one guy online hint at this too. And you see this with like Disney Pixar movies, right? So some people make these interesting arguments, and I've wondered this in the past, but I never really focused on doing a piece on it because it's, it's just so speculative. But some people will argue that the Pixar movies are all taking place in the same universe, and so you'll have cross references in those fictional kids movies, right? Between The Incredibles, this is taking place maybe at a different time, but it's the same world of Finding Nemo or something. I think that Lynch does this, and there's a few examples of this. Now, for example, in Wild at Heart, the character Cheryl, I always get Cheryl Lee and Sherilyn Fenn. Cheryl Lee that actress's character seems to be in Wild at Heart, where Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern's character are Leland and Lula are driving down a highway, and it's a kind of lost highway, and they bump into there's a car wreck out in the middle of the desert at night, and they find a wandering Sherilyn Fenn type character who's on her way to Hollywood. We get the impression, maybe, and she's got a severe head wound. She's been killed, and she kind of pops into this fictional world and then out of that fictional world. Now, is Lynch saying that the character that Sherilyn Flynn plays in Twin Peaks, is that the fictional character who ends up in Lost Highway? Possibly. And my thesis makes sense when you think about Inland Empire, because in Inland Empire you have Laura Dern, who's also in Lost Highway, in Wild at Heart. It's all about meta, right? So it's like meta. There's like 3 levels removed of meta in Inland Empire, and we get possibly the impression that with the rabbits, right, the famous rabbit bunny scene from Inland Empire, that we're talking about entering and walking out of people's psyches. This is what Laura Dern seems to do. She kind of seems to tap into the psyche of different horrors from 50 or 60 years prior to her in Poland. So time and space are out of the way, and there's this walking into other people's dreams and mindscapes, dreamscapes, and subconscious, stepping through the ether, down halls and doorways. And we see this, Fred does this in Lost Highway, where he seems to step into the psyche of Balthazar Getty's character, Pete, in the second half of Lost Highway. So cross-fictional worlds melding and mixing, right? The same sort of thesis that is Stephen King's notion in the Dark Tower series, right? So if you know what happens in the Dark Tower series, that tower is just kind of like in the middle of alternate worlds, and you walk through different doors in the tower, and you can step into different people's psyches, and not just different people's psyches, but into fictional worlds. And that's why the clown from Stephen King's It will show up in the Dark Tower series. And I'm just using it as an example of this, of the mixing of fictional worlds. And maybe there's a deeper metaphysical possibility here. It's something I've wondered and speculated on just on my own. Like, what if that's actually kind of true? What do you mean that's crazy? Well, it's true in the sense that if the astral realm is real, if the psychosphere is real, the ether, and if that's where we go, like when we sleep and dream, then maybe when we, die, we who knows where we go, what we step into in terms of, before meeting our final desserts of Judgment Day or whatever. Maybe we spend a period of time in that realm. I don't know, but definitely possible. This is what happens to people in out-of-body experiences or, intense drug hallucinogen trips. And, maybe it is possible to step into fictional worlds, because what are fictional worlds but simply manifestations of another person's subconscious put into art? Interesting, right? That's my own personal thesis. Right? I can't prove that, but just something I've been speculating on. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood, and I'm your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. I want to remind you, too, to check out michiganmushrooms.net, where you have the best selection of organic mushrooms picked directly out of the forest. No GMO, no crap from corporations. Michiganmushrooms.net, they go out and do their own harvesting, and then they take shotgun mushrooms and send them to you. Welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I want to remind you that that intro song that you hear for Esoteric Hollywood is Dream Agent, and this is by Ariel Electron, Holig Spies, and Thierry Gauthier, and you can find that online if you type in the Kore Cosmu album, Korekosmu SMOU. And the song is Dream Agent, and you can find that to download or to purchase the CD, which I think is really good. Ariel's music is excellent. Now, so Dream Agent is appropriate here because we've been talking about my philosophy of the dream world, the dream realm, the spiritual realm, the ether, and how it relates to these curious surrealist presentations from David Lynch. And I likened it to things like the Dark Tower series with Stephen King. And we've been talking about Bob and the spirit Bob that possesses people to commit murders under the auspices of the higher demon, the man from another place, right? And you know, this astral realm, this realm of the imagination, the imaginal. This comes up quite a bit in David Lynch's philosophy because David Lynch runs the Transcendental Meditation Foundation. Well, he runs the Lynch Foundation, which is tied into Transcendental Meditation, I should say. And if you watch interviews with David Lynch, he talks about this and he discusses the inner world of the psyche, the subconscious, and so forth, as this source, this wellspring from which artists can draw creativity. And then, you know, you get into the history of TM, and this going back to the Beatles, and this going back to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, and these different practices and techniques of self-improvement through meditation and so forth, and the Eastern Zen-ish influence upon Lynch and in his film works, which, you know, when I was 18 or 19, I would go and watch David Lynch movies in the theater, and I was like, what the heck is going on? I don't get any of this. None of this makes sense. This is just completely crazy. And as I got older and you know, really delved into philosophy, esoterica, theology, and so forth, it started making a lot more sense. I started really, I think, getting a better handle on David Lynch's movies and artwork, and this is what it is, right? I mean, this is what he says in interviews. This is, you know, you can watch his interview with Lipton, that whatever that guy, Bruce Lipton or whatever his name is, that does all the sit downs with actors and directors, and you can watch that on YouTube, and Lynch will talk about what I'm talking about. So it's not just me speculating here. I'm trying to get an impression of this from David Lynch's mind himself to see what he says about his films, and this is essentially what he says. And so in that final sequence, you know, why is Cooper possessed? Well, as we said, he went too far into the dark side. But Cooper ends up trapped. We discover his spirit, right? He confronts his unconscious shade self, as well as facing up to his responsibility for past deaths. And Cooper ends up trapped with Annie and Laura in the Black Lodge. It's kind of a prison. As a demonic Bob / Cooper we get the impression, begin wreaking havoc. So now Cooper's going to be the possessed agent here. It's also worth noting that here in this feature film, Laura's initial journey in the film, all right, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, the initial journeys into the dreamscape / astral realm result in an encounter with Annie, Cooper's girlfriend in season 2. And she says in the movie that she is with Laura and Coop. Right, now this is interesting because it came out prior to the conclusion of season 2, where we find out what happened to Annie. Right, so, and as is the case in Lynch's Mulholland Drive, it's electrical phenomena, as we said, and static charges that tend to accompany the manifestation of these otherworldly spirits. So they seem to have some sort of ability to travel through electricity. Now the Black Lodge members can do this, it seems, and then manifest in some sort of physical form, like the cowboy character in Mulholland Drive. Anyone who's seen Mulholland Drive, you know about the cowboy. So in conclusion, I think what we're going to see in the return of Twin Peaks has this eerie connection to what Laura predicted in the original series. So I don't know how this, I mean, it was planned Apparently, because in the original series, I think it's episode 3, where we first see Laura in the Black Lodge spirit realm, and Laura says, in the spirit realm, "I'll see you in 25 years." in reverse, but put into forward. Anyway, which you can see this clip. I'll play this clip here in the show here in a minute. But so it's like in the show 25 years ago, Laura says, "I'll see you in 25 years," and then Twin Peaks is being rebooted 25 years later. It's pretty mind blowing. Talk about synchronicity. Talk about planning. Wow. All right, so Laura says to an old coop in the Black Lodge, where there's this in this scene, back in 1991, there's an old Colin McLaughlin wearing makeup. "I'll see you again in 25 years, hinting that this would return, and then 25 years later, it's returning. So with the recent announcement then of Showtime picking up the reboot within the last year, I think we can expect an even deeper foray into the unconscious of both Laura and Agent Cooper. And even if for some reason the show doesn't return, the original series and the feature film have an amazingly precise window into the real America, a land haunted by, I believe, primal elemental spirits of the past, Native American deities, controlled by a cult that adheres to these kinds of ancient beliefs, right? The real so-called Illuminati. The American power elite are like kind of Ben Horn, but Ben Horn, right, the money power, I guess you could say, but the Ben Horn money power is subservient to the preternatural forces that they can't control. That would be behind this veil of obscurity that lies in a cult elite whose power seems to derive from a Black Lodge. Now, a bit of reflection here on what we're seeing in this. What does all this mean? Well, as we said, it's partly satire, but it's not. It's dark satire, and I've seen interesting presentations that many of the characters match up to the archetypes of the tarot deck, but then again, the archetypes of the tarot deck are just based on archetypes anyway, so I don't know about all that, but there's no question that the film is about synchronicity, that the series is about synchronicity. It's about the Eastern version and notion of these things, which when you go further back into Far Eastern alchemy and lore, what you find is that it bears all these same similarities to Western esoterica and hermeticism and alchemy. So that to me suggests some perennial primordial source of whatever we call the perennial tradition. Now, that is hinted at right in the Goetia and the sigils that are in the background of the crime scene when Cooper and the officers are investigating. And we pretty much find like the totality of conspiracy presented here. There's not really any element, I don't think, that's left out, right? We have like all the black markets are covered through being run by Ben Horn, who's tied into this different mafia groups. And then we have the occult background that's behind that, that's even more nefarious. That's run by this kind of hierarchy of demons that will, once you die, if you're a murderer, like Bob and Gerard. Bob and Gerard are spirits who are put under the service of the demon, the man from another place. And it also ties in, interestingly, to Native American theology and spirituality and lore, because that's the indigenous, religion prior to the arrival of Christianity in North America. So, it's kind of like the old-time religion. That old-time religion, right? But the old-time religion, which is, I guess, Native American spirituality, which would involve the worship of, forms of animism and spiritism and so forth. But underlying that animism and spiritism in Native Americanism would be, at least according to the perennial view, a similar pattern, a similar perennial philosophy. And that seems to be what's going on here, because that ties in directly to that ties directly into the Far Eastern approach that Lynch seems to favor. Now, the Black Lodge is interesting because it features things like Saturn. It's this imprisoning section. Seems to be somewhat box-like, but it has Saturnalian imagery in it, because when Laura's there, she's sitting next to this big lamp that's the planet Saturn, and in esoteric thought, much of it, at least in the West, Saturn is likened to the cube, the box, 6 sides and so forth, and Saturn purportedly has this hexagonal storm. There's some sort of hexagonal imagery to the storm that's on Saturn, if we can believe what we're told about Saturn. Who knows if that's even true, if NASA's not just faking all those images. I don't know, but regardless, Saturn has been connected to human sacrifice historically, and that's what's happening in Twin Peaks, and that's why we see Laura next to the image of Saturn. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood, and I'm your host, Jay Dyer of jaysanalysis.com. Stay tuned. Final segment here at Jay's Analysis. And we're talking about Lost Highway. We're talking about Twin Peaks. We're talking about David Lynch. David Lynch. You have to listen to Jay Dyer at Jay's Analysis. The best breakdown of Twin Peaks and Mulholland Drive on the internet. All right, that's my David Lynch. I'm done. I won't subject you to any more David Lynch impersonations, I promise. Or I might be lying. I may do it for the rest of the show. Okay, I won't. But remember, as we started out, Lynch said, I learned just beneath the surface there's another world, and still different worlds as you dig deeper. Right? What was the poem to go along with Twin Peaks? Through the darkness of futures past, the magician longs to see. One chance out between two worlds, fire walk with me. And that is a shamanic, firewalking type of poetry, right? At least that's what it's intended to invoke. I mean, it's fictional, but that's what it's about. And we're supposed to understand from that Cooper is a shaman. And this even comes up in the show, right? Now, the reason, one of the main reasons that I'm quite confident that my analysis of Twin Peaks is completely spot on, because as I cite in my analysis, Ioan Culiano's book Out of This World is all about the shamanic journey, and from different religious traditions, perennial philosophy, and then the treatment of the spiritual worlds, the spiritual realm, something like you'd read in Carlos Castaneda, right, of the journey of the shaman into the spiritual world, or the different other worlds. And that's exactly what Twin Peaks is about. And when we look at the architecture of that world, that philosophy, shamanism, ancient traditions, so forth, we tend to see these patterns, right? So when I talk about perennial philosophy or traditionalist philosophy, what I'm talking about is this kind of movement or school in the last century, 150 years. This would be people like Fritjof Schuon. This would be people like Mircea Eliade or Ioan Culiano or Rene Guénon, Rama Kumaraswamy, Ananda Kumaraswamy. Actually, his son Rama Kumaraswamy ended up a Sedevacantist traditional Catholic, oddly enough. But the other characters that we've mentioned would fall roughly in the perennial tradition. And one might even include Aldous Huxley in this tradition, because Huxley has a book, The Perennial Philosophy, which I've read. And there, what you get is basically this idea of Well, all the religions are saying the same thing. It ultimately, it's kind of syncretistic, so I'm not a huge fan of perennial philosophy. But I think that there's a lot of insights in those writers because they're looking to ancient traditions, which can be insightful at times against the ultimate evil juggernaut of modernity and atheism. So even though I wouldn't advocate, like Hinduism or something, at least Hinduism talks about a spiritual realm and so forth, right? Which, atheism is intended to induct everyone into this materialistic, meaningless, nihilistic view, and then that's actually ultimately intended to take people further into Luciferianism, which this is what the secret societies actually talk about, is the implementation of atheism as a stage, as a process of moving humanity supposedly into Luciferianism, right? Which is kind of a bunch of nonsense in my view, because Luciferianism is not really, in my view, doesn't make much sense. But that's why I was citing these tantric texts, not to promote tantrism, but to point out what I think Twin Peaks is talking about. And Twin Peaks is talking about that intentional language of Sandabayasa. If you think about the funny scene, it's episode 2 or 3, where Cooper gathers all the local law enforcement and through association and through intentionality, he's going to throw rocks at different objects that represent different people, and then he's writing stuff on a chalkboard based on where the rocks land. And that scene's actually pretty funny because Cooper says, I'm actually going to use a Buddhist technique to do this. And then everybody else just kind of thinks he's crazy. They don't know what the heck's going on. And ironically, the divination technique of Cooper ends up being right. But I think it's great, too, that, I don't know what Lynch's motivations are for this, but, Cooper delves deeper into the dark side and he ends up possessed. And, that's a positive warning. Whether David Lynch intends that to be the positive warning or not, I don't know. But that's at least what happens in the storyline of the show. And we see that in Lost Highway too. In Lost Highway, Fred kind of gives into his dark side. He turns into this demonic kind of creature who's more or less possessed by, I guess, Robert Blake, who's like the devil character in that film. The man in black in that film, right? So we have the man from another place, the man in black, evoking this sort of government agent, but like government agent of the devil kind of thing. The man from another place is this midget little devil character, the Joker, trickster. But he's a trickster who demands ritual sacrifice. And, I think ritual sacrifice does happen. It's happened in human history. And it probably still goes on. And if you have this occultic view that many of the elite seem to have, then what you believe about human sacrifice is that you're actually offering the energy of humanity as a transference of power into the spiritual realm, where you're directing that power towards some intention, right? So you want to further your goals. So the idea is, well, I can placate spirits perhaps, or just push this spiritual energy out by intentionally sacrificing people. Now, how might that be? Well, it might be done through war. You might send a whole bunch of people to war, to fight in battle as a kind of big human sacrifice. You might implement things like abortion as a human sacrifice, with the offering of the firstborn of a good portion of American citizens, right? The abortion clinics that are everywhere. And then we see these videos coming out of Planned Parenthood where they're like giggling and laughing about it, assuming all those videos are what they're presented as. I'm not saying that they're fake. I'm just saying, assuming that, who knows what's going on with videos these days. There's so much trickery, hoaxery, and fakery out there that you have to be kind of skeptical, is all I'm saying. But there's certainly people who are that sick where they're like joking about baby parts and just mind-blowing stuff. That makes more sense as a sacrifice. Even if every one of those individuals involved in a Planned Parenthood locale doesn't intentionally talk about it being a human sacrifice or know that or believe that, from the monetary powers and influence far above them, it could very well be that. And you may think that sounds crazy, but then when you see things come out in the news like Savile and so forth, where there appear to be people who believe these things, they're probably going to act on it. I don't know for sure. I'm just saying this could be the case. And I did a recent interview with Greg Moffat of Legalized Freedom, and we talked about this there, where we got into the subject of shamans, demons, and Hollywood. So you can listen to that interview. And I played that a couple shows back. The majority of that interview here on Esoteric Hollywood, where we got into the connection between these things. You might think, well, what would there be connection? Why would there be a connection between shamans, demons, and Hollywood? Well, there could be. And I make that argument there. And if we want to get a real picture, I think, of the conspiracy put into film, a lot of people talk about Eyes Wide Shut, and I've dealt extensively with Eyes Wide Shut, or The Ninth Gate with Johnny Depp, which we'll eventually do an episode of Esoteric Hollywood on that show. But another example would be Twin Peaks, and I can't think of as I said, I can't think of an element of the so-called conspiracy that is left out of that film. And in my view, the so-called conspiracy only makes sense when you have a spiritual realm, right? It's not just human beings, coordinating large-scale global human destruction and enslavement. It's directed by spiritual evil, right? Now, I don't believe that spiritual evil is, has total control or power, but this is what we see, in Matthew 4, where the devil says to Jesus, let me take you up on a mountain. I'll show you the kingdoms of the world. These have been given to me for a time, right? He offers the kingdoms of the world, and we get the impression that, this is for some period of time. But, ultimately in the biblical presentation, at least, that's not the final end of the story. It's not ultimately the devil that wins, although people who buy into the dark side and Gnosticism and all these different alternative religious views and occultism and not so much Satanism, that's kind of just hedonism, but the presentations of people that really believe in like real Luciferian spiritual things like that. They think that the dark side has the upper hand. I don't think so. I think that the Bible has a better explanation, is a better model of categorizing and explaining what the conspiracy really is. It's not ultimately a conspiracy of just rich guys. Because rich guys are still humans. They're still finite. They're still limited. But we have evil existing from the dawn of time, afflicting humanity, right? Not just rich guys. So a lot of people, aren't willing to go beyond the material realm or the physical realm or the human realm of understanding the so-called conspiracy. And ironically, the Bible all along has described the so-called conspiracy, and it's a conspiracy of the devil to destroy man and to wipe out the image of God in man. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. Thank you for staying with me, and we were deconstructing Twin Peaks.